The video explores the surprising parallels between the ancient Stoic philosophy and modern concepts of financial freedom. It reveals how timeless Stoic principles can be applied to navigate the complexities of personal finance, offering practical advice for achieving financial well-being in the 21st century. In a world obsessed with instant gratification, the ancient Stoics offer a timeless approach to achieving lasting financial well-being. Discover how their principles can help you build a future you can truly control. Picture yourself late at night, scrolling through your bank app, wondering how your paycheck vanished so fast. Or maybe you're lying awake, tallying bills in your head like they're sheep that won't jump the fence. Your fingers hover over an add to cart button, as if a new phone case will fix the existential dread. You're not alone. And, brace yourself, you probably won't know this, the very same emotions running your show tonight were also felt by people in togas, thousands of years ago. Different currency, same chaos. The Stoics lived through collapsing empires, unpredictable economies, and, yes, overpriced olive oil. Yet somehow, they managed to keep their sanity and self-respect without maxing out their equivalent of a credit card. Why? Because instead of trying to control the wild economy around them, they focused on the one thing they could master, their minds. Before you settle in, feel free to like the video if it brought you a little peace, and if you'd like to join us again, we'd love to have you back. Subscribe when you're ready. No pressure, just rest. Share something if you feel like it. Let's slowly drift into tonight's quiet moments together. You start to feel it already, this tension between the modern rat race and something older, quieter, steadier. It begins with one big question: why do the Stoics still matter? Imagine you're standing in a crowded market in ancient Athens. There's noise, bargaining, pickpockets, overpriced figs. Now fast forward to a strip mall parking lot on Black Friday. One scene has sandals, the other has Crocs, but emotionally? Identical. The Stoics, like Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca, weren't floating on clouds of spiritual bliss. They were embedded in the political, economic, and social messiness of their day. Epictetus was born a slave. Marcus Aurelius governed during plagues and wars. Seneca had to tutor a narcissistic emperor who eventually had him executed. Not exactly #blessed. And yet, they stayed calm. Clear. Free. Not because they had money, but because they knew what it couldn't buy. Here's something interesting. Archaeologists found personal notes from Epictetus scribbled on clay tablets, almost like journaling prompts. They weren't lofty ideas, they were practical reminders: don't seek too much. What you avoid controls you. Freedom begins with discipline. Even 2,000 years ago, someone was doing a morning routine. From a psychological lens, this kind of self-reflection is a powerful form of cognitive reframing. In 2006, a study out of the University of Pennsylvania showed that structured reflection, a close cousin to Stoic journaling, significantly lowered symptoms of anxiety and improved decision-making in high-stress environments. So yes, writing your thoughts out in the tone of a slightly judgy philosopher does help. You may not think of financial stress as a philosophical issue, but Stoicism argues that it is. It's not about numbers, it's about the meaning you assign to them. You don't panic about your bank account because you're bad at math, you panic because your mind ties money to safety, status, even self-worth. Philosophers still argue whether Stoicism should be seen as a therapy or a moral code. But there's no debate that its practical tools, like detachment, reflection, and prioritizing what you control, have helped people handle uncertainty for centuries. And money is pure, unfiltered uncertainty. One moment it's coming in, the next it's evaporated in subscriptions you forgot to cancel and lattes that felt like self-care at the time. The Stoics weren't against wealth. Seneca himself was one of the richest men in Rome. But he constantly reminded himself, and others, that wealth is only valuable when you can walk away from it. And that is where we start redefining financial freedom. Because maybe freedom isn't having more. Maybe it's needing less. Imagine this: you're sitting in your living room, no debt, no need to impress anyone, and no constant urge to check your bank balance. You're not rich, but you're untangled. You're not chasing You're choosing. That's Stoicism's gift. An odd but true fact, Seneca once practiced sleeping on the floor once a month, even though he had silk sheets waiting for him. Why? So he'd never be afraid of losing them. Fear, he knew, is the real poverty. Richness is being okay either way. Modern psychology backs this idea. In a widely cited study published in Psychological Science, researchers found that people who regularly engaged in what's called experiential contrast, intentionally imagining or exposing themselves to less comfortable situations, had higher emotional resilience and better long-term planning. That kind of mental toughness isn't macho, it's smart. So where does that leave you, exactly? Somewhere between your last Amazon impulse buy and your next budgeting app download, maybe. But that's okay. Because tonight isn't about shaming yourself for what you've spent. It's about softening into the idea that maybe, just maybe, your financial peace isn't out there waiting. It's already inside you, waiting for less noise. That shift in energy leads us into something else, a deeper unraveling of our need to control things, especially things that were never ours to manage in the first place. So you've been told, probably more than once, that if you just plan better, save smarter, and hustle harder, you'll be fine. Financial peace is just one perfect budget away, right? Well, maybe not. Because here's the strange truth the Stoics figured out centuries ago: the more you try to control the uncontrollable, the more you suffer. Now imagine you're standing on a beach. Waves are crashing in, unpredictable and strong. You can build a dam, or you can learn to float. Most of us are out there with buckets, trying to scoop the tide back out to sea. But the Stoics? They're on a towel with a book, letting the water wash around them. The idea of control, or rather, the illusion of it, is one of Stoicism's core insights. Epictetus said it best: some things are up to us, and some things are not. He was talking about things like your thoughts, your choices, your actions. Not the stock market, not your boss's moods, and definitely not the price of oat milk. And yet, here we are, refreshing our investment apps like they hold the meaning of life. In psychological terms, this links closely to what's called locus of control. People with an internal locus believe they shape their destiny. Those with an external locus believe they're at the mercy of fate. But here's the nuance the Stoics add: knowing where to focus that internal energy matters. If you waste it trying to master things that aren't yours to manage, you burn out. But if you aim it inward, you build real strength. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that individuals with a well-calibrated sense of control, not over everything, but over the right things, had significantly higher life satisfaction. Not just that, they were also better with money. Not because they had more of it, but because they stressed about it less. You might find this surprising. During times of economic collapse in ancient Rome, some Stoics actually flourished emotionally. Not because they were oblivious, but because they expected change. They weren't emotionally invested in things staying the same. No 401k panic attacks for them. Think of it this way. You can't control whether the market crashes, but you can control how often you check it. You can't control layoffs, but you can control your skill set. You can't control inflation, but you can control whether you buy that 12th throw pillow. A long-standing controversy surrounds the modern self-help industry's obsession with manifestation. Stoics would have rolled their eyes. Not because dreaming is bad, but because fantasizing about things outside your control, especially financially, sets you up for heartbreak. It's not pessimism. It's preemptive emotional budgeting. Now, that's not to say you should abandon planning or goal setting. But it's about aligning your mental energy with what actually belongs to you. Your time. Your discipline. Your response to disappointment. All the rest, bonuses. There's also something deeply calming about acknowledging your limits. Let's be real, how much of your financial stress is tied to trying to hold too many strings? The rent. The car. The insurance. The subscriptions. That spreadsheet that looks like it belongs in a NASA control room. What if you just didn't need to hold them all? Here's something interesting. Stoic philosophers regularly practiced what they called premeditatio malorum, or the premeditation of evils. They'd imagine the worst-case scenario, losing their home, their wealth, their status, and ask themselves, could I survive this? Often, the answer was yes. And in that moment, they felt lighter. In today's world, you're trained to seek control. Insurance, contracts, plans B through Z. And yet, how often do those things actually shield you from pain? Think about the last time something fell apart. Was it really because you didn't plan hard enough? Psychologists call this the control paradox. The more you try to guarantee an outcome, the more anxious you become about every small deviation. A stock dips, and suddenly your whole body tenses. A bill comes in early, and it ruins your week. You're not just responding to reality, you're reacting to a loss of control. But the Stoics offer you an out. Not by numbing yourself, but by narrowing your focus. Imagine a life where your peace isn't tied to your paycheck. Where a market downturn doesn't hijack your whole nervous system. Where your self-worth isn't based on your ability to stay on top of things. You're allowed to let go. In fact, the Stoics would argue that's where your real power begins. There remains considerable disagreement about whether this kind of radical detachment is emotionally healthy or a form of avoidance. But research suggests that healthy detachment, the kind grounded in clarity, not cynicism, actually boosts your resilience. It's not that you stop caring. You just stop clinging. Just a quirky detail, Marcus Aurelius, emperor of one of the most powerful empires in history, would remind himself daily that his reign, and his wealth, could end at any moment. He used to meditate on the fragility of his possessions and his reputation. He wasn't depressed. He was grounded. And arguably, that's what made him a stable leader. So tonight, let this be a quiet thought. What if you released the grip? What if your financial freedom starts not with gaining more control, but by surrendering the illusion of it? There's peace in that surrender. A kind of quiet you can't buy. And that shift in mindset leads us into something else that's been dancing in the shadows of your bank statements: desire. Desire. The thing that creeps in during late-night scrolls through online stores. The itch behind your impulse purchases. The whisper that tells you, you deserve this, even when your credit card is still recovering from the last treat-yourself moment. Desire isn't new. The Stoics were swatting it away long before algorithms figured out how to target you based on your browsing history. And if there's one place where desire shows its truest colors, it's in the world of money. Let's start with your brain. Neuroscientists have long known that when you anticipate buying something, yes, even a scented candle or yet another water bottle, your brain releases a shot of dopamine. Not when you get the thing, but when you expect it. That's right, the thrill is in the chase, not the checkout. The Stoics didn't have fMRI machines, but they understood this pattern. Seneca wrote extensively about the trap of longing. According to him, the more you want, the more you become a slave to that want. In his eyes, desire wasn't just emotional, it was financial quicksand. A 2016 study in Journal of Consumer Research showed that people who experience frequent, high-intensity desire for material goods tend to report lower overall satisfaction in life, even when they can afford the items. The temporary high fades fast, and what's left is a gnawing hunger for the next thing. Now tie that to money. Your brain learns that buying relieves discomfort. You're stressed, you buy something. You're sad, you buy something. You're bored, oh look, same routine. And this loop, unchecked, turns into debt. Here's something interesting. Some early Stoics practiced delayed gratification not just as discipline, but as an actual pleasure. They believed that the joy of mastering a desire was better than the pleasure of indulging it. They got a rush from saying no. Imagine getting a dopamine hit from restraint. It's not just about skipping Starbucks. It's about rewiring your reward system. Philosophers have long debated the nature of desire, whether it's inherently bad, or whether it simply needs wise direction. The Stoics weren't anti-pleasure. They enjoyed wine, company, even wealth. But they warned that when desire becomes unexamined, it becomes a tyrant. So how does this show up for you? Picture a moment when you stood in a store, holding something you didn't need but desperately wanted. You knew it wasn't essential, but something inside insisted it would make your day better. That little surge, that warm spark of imagined improvement, is psychological desire. But it's a trickster. And it's expensive. The problem is, modern life feeds this trickster. Social media isn't just a feed, it's a desire machine. You see other people's curated moments, filtered lives, their financial wins, and somewhere inside, your mind whispers, you should have that too. Not because you want it, but because they have it. The Stoics would call this externals, things that don't belong to you, don't define you, and don't need to control you. They warned constantly against being ruled by what others have or do. You might find this surprising. Epictetus used to tell his students to imagine themselves as actors in a play. If your role is a pauper, he said, play it well. If you're a king, fine, but don't get attached to the costume. The message? Your wealth isn't your identity. It's just the outfit you wear this season. Modern psychology has caught up. Behavioral economists like Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler have shown that much of what we do with money isn't rational, it's emotional. We buy status, comfort, relief from insecurity. We spend to feel something. The numbers are almost secondary. And that's where the Stoics sneak back in with their minimalist message, want less, and you'll spend less, not just money, but energy. Just a quirky detail, Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, lost his entire fortune in a shipwreck. Instead of despairing, he said it was the best thing that ever happened to him. It forced him to study philosophy. Imagine your stock portfolio evaporating and thinking, well, I guess it's time to reevaluate my purpose. That's some next-level resilience. This doesn't mean you should burn your budget or cancel your retirement plan. But it does mean you might want to ask, what am I really buying? Relief? Validation? A 5-minute high? Desire isn't evil. But it's slippery. And the more you try to satisfy it with things, the more it grows. Like feeding a stray cat, it keeps coming back. Louder. The Stoics propose a simple solution: inspect your desires. Hold them up to the light. Ask, what will this really do for me? And then, this is the part most people skip, practice going without. The discomfort is the training ground. Modern psychology calls this dopamine fasting, the practice of intentionally stepping away from stimulating activities to recalibrate your brain's reward system. It's the science version of a Stoic cleanse. And it works. After just a few days without compulsive stimuli, people report increased focus, emotional balance, and yes, better financial behavior. Imagine this: next time you feel that impulse to buy something, you pause. You breathe. You acknowledge the desire, and then let it pass. Like watching a wave roll in and out, without running toward it. That's not repression. That's freedom. Because true financial freedom isn't about amassing enough to indulge every desire. It's about desiring less in the first place. And as that craving quiets, another sensation begins to rise: resilience. Which brings us to a strange, powerful Stoic practice that trains your mind for exactly that. Now we step into something that might sound strange at first: voluntary discomfort. Yes, on purpose. Choosing to be uncomfortable. No, not because the Stoics were masochists with a flair for drama, but because they believed that the right kind of discomfort can actually make you stronger, calmer, and, oddly enough, more financially free. Imagine waking up and deciding to sleep on the floor. Not because your bed broke. Just because. Or skipping lunch when you could easily afford it. Or wearing your oldest clothes out, even though you have a closet full of nicer options. Sounds a little out there, right? But to a Stoic, these moments are powerful training. Seneca recommended practicing poverty at regular intervals, even while he was one of the wealthiest men in Rome. His reasoning? To prove to yourself that you can survive it. Set aside a number of days, he wrote, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, is this the condition I feared? Here's something interesting. In recent years, psychologists have been studying something called exposure therapy for anxiety disorders. The concept? Gently and repeatedly exposing yourself to the things you fear, so that your brain learns it's not as dangerous as it thinks. Voluntary discomfort works in a similar way. You're teaching your nervous system to stop reacting like the world is ending every time a small financial setback happens. A 2018 study in Frontiers in Psychology found that individuals who engaged in voluntary hardship, things like fasting, cold exposure, or abstaining from luxuries, reported higher emotional resilience and lower levels of financial anxiety. Basically, they stopped catastrophizing normal life events. Like a surprise expense or a missed payment didn't feel like the end of the world anymore. Just a thing that happened. And that's the core psychological benefit: you become emotionally anti-fragile. Less afraid of change. Less reactive when your budget takes a hit. You start to realize how little you actually need to feel okay. You might find this surprising. Modern Stoic-inspired entrepreneurs, yes, people in suits, have adopted this practice quietly. Some take no-spend weeks. Others schedule comfort fasts where they intentionally downgrade their lifestyle for a few days. Not forever. Just long enough to reset their internal barometers. Philosophers still argue whether deliberate suffering crosses into unhealthy asceticism. But there's growing support in psychology for what's called strategic discomfort, temporary, intentional hardship as a tool for growth. The Stoics didn't want you to suffer randomly. They wanted you to be prepared. And voluntary discomfort was their secret weapon. Now pause and think about your own finances. What makes you anxious? Not being able to afford rent? Losing your job? Needing to cancel a vacation? Whatever it is, what if you practiced a milder version of that scenario, just to see how it feels? No, not to manifest doom, but to realize your strength, your adaptability, your actual needs. Just a quirky detail: Epictetus used to walk barefoot in the snow. Not because he enjoyed frostbite, but because he believed that mastering his body's response to cold would help him stay calm under stress. Also, probably to mess with people a little. Let's be honest, he had a flair for theatrics. Think of it this way: when you deliberately introduce discomfort into your life, you're rewiring your brain. You're training yourself not to panic when things don't go your way. That skill? Invaluable when your car breaks down, when a bill is higher than expected, or when your paycheck gets delayed. And there's another side effect. You start appreciating comfort more. After a week of frugal living, rice and beans, no takeout, no online shopping, your regular lifestyle feels downright luxurious. Even if it's not objectively fancy. Gratitude sneaks in where entitlement used to live. It's a kind of psychological judo. You flip the craving. Instead of wanting more, you begin to savor what you already have. This ties into what researchers call hedonic adaptation, the tendency for people to quickly return to a baseline level of satisfaction no matter how much their circumstances improve. You get a raise, and a month later, it feels normal. You buy a nicer car, and soon it just feels like your car. The thrill fades. But voluntary discomfort breaks that cycle. It resets your expectations. It gives you a baseline to compare against. Suddenly, you're not chasing the next dopamine hit. You're soaking up the quiet luxury of a normal, stable day. Picture this: you eat a simple dinner by candlelight, just pasta and tap water. No TV, no scrolling, no second helpings. At first, it feels weird. Too quiet. Too plain. But then, your mind settles. Your body softens. The food tastes richer. You realize you're okay. You're still you. And you didn't need anything fancy to get there. That's the hidden magic of voluntary discomfort. It turns your ordinary life into something extraordinary. Not by upgrading the things, but by upgrading your perspective. Now, you don't need to become a barefoot philosopher tomorrow. But you can experiment. Skip the Uber and walk. Take a cold shower on purpose. Go a weekend without spending. Pack lunch all week like it's a game. Not to prove a point, but to teach your nervous system that it's safe even when things feel a little sparse. This kind of training bleeds into your finances in a sneaky, wonderful way. You start hesitating before impulse buys. You stop panicking over minor expenses. You build a deep, unshakable sense that no matter what happens, you'll adapt. And that's real freedom. That mindset shift begins to ripple out. You stop needing to impress people. You stop needing financial abundance to feel okay. You just breathe easier. And that quiet confidence opens the door to something even deeper, the social world around you, and the invisible pressure it puts on your wallet. Social pressure is sneaky. It doesn't knock on your door and announce itself. It just sort of slides into your life like a party guest who wasn't invited but somehow brought the fanciest bottle of wine. It shows up in your shopping cart, in your vacation plans, in the harmless way you feel a little less than when your neighbor gets a new car. Now here's where it gets wild. The Stoics saw this coming long before Instagram, long before high school reunions, long before anyone made a flex reel. They understood something crucial: status is a trap. A shiny, well-dressed trap. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And nowhere is that clearer than in the silent game of comparison we play with the people around us. The ones who seem more successful, more stylish, more together. But here's the truth: when you measure your life against someone else's highlight reel, you're always going to come up short. In modern psychology, this has a name: social comparison theory. Coined by Leon Festinger in 1954, it describes our deep, almost reflexive tendency to evaluate ourselves based on how we stack up to others. The problem is, we rarely compare ourselves to people with less. We look up, not down. That means that comparison almost always leaves us feeling like we're behind. You might find this surprising. In a famous 2005 study, participants were asked whether they'd prefer to earn $50,000 a year while everyone else earned $25,000, or earn $100,000 while everyone else earned $250,000. A significant number chose the first option. They'd rather earn less as long as it meant being ahead of the pack. That's how powerful status can be. The Stoics weren't immune to it, they just called it out for what it was: a distraction. A false god. Epictetus was blunt: if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Translation? If you stop trying to impress people, you start getting free. There remains considerable disagreement among scholars about whether Stoicism encourages withdrawal from society or simply detachment from its expectations. But there's no debate that the Stoics believed chasing status was like trying to hold smoke in your hands: exhausting, impossible, and bound to burn you. Let's get more real for a second. Ever bought something not because you loved it, but because you thought it made you look a certain way? The premium shoes, the expensive watch, the house in the good neighborhood, even when it squeezed your budget a little too tight. That's not you being shallow. That's social psychology at work. We're wired to signal things: wealth, security, taste, identity. And in today's world, most of those signals cost money. But here's something interesting: once your basic needs are met, increased income doesn't make you proportionally happier. That's according to a widely cited study by Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton. Beyond a certain point, the correlation between money and emotional well-being flatlines. You're not buying joy. You're renting a mood. Just a quirky detail: Stoic philosopher Musonius Rufus once argued that luxury items don't just waste money, they damage character. He believed that indulging in unnecessary extravagance made people more anxious, more impulsive, and less empathetic. And all of this, in a world without Instagram filters. Fast forward to now, and his words feel like a commentary on FOMO culture. So how do you escape the trap? One Stoic strategy is brutal honesty. Ask yourself, if no one saw this, would I still want it? If the answer is no, it's not a true desire. It's a performance. This isn't about living like a monk in a cave. It's about regaining clarity. Spending intentionally. Choosing your life, not defaulting to it based on what your friends, coworkers, or high school nemesis are doing. Another Stoic move? Mentally rehearse losing status. Picture being overlooked. Picture someone mocking your old car or your modest wardrobe. Picture not being the successful one at the reunion. And then? Ask, am I still me? Spoiler, yes, you are. And you might even feel lighter. In psychology, this aligns with what's known as identity-based motivation. When your goals and habits are based on a stable sense of self, not external approval, you're more consistent, less anxious, and far more resilient. It's also more sustainable. Because you're no longer trying to keep up. You're grounded, rooted, immune to trends. Or at least less easily pulled into them. Imagine it, you walk into a room wearing your favorite old hoodie. You drive your reliable, slightly rusty car. You bring lunch in a reused glass jar. And you feel calm. Not because you're proving anything, but because you've got nothing to prove. That's the Stoic flex. And as that sense of freedom grows, you start noticing something else. Gratitude. Not the performative kind. The quiet, personal, soul-level kind. The kind that changes how you see everything you already have. Which brings us into the next part of this quiet transformation. Gratitude. It sounds like one of those words your overly cheery coworker might scribble on a sticky note and slap onto a vision board next to manifest and morning matcha. But don't let the buzzword vibe fool you. Gratitude is one of the most powerful, underutilized financial tools in your psychological toolkit. And the Stoics knew it long before the wellness industry caught on. Now imagine this, you're sipping your morning coffee, nothing fancy, just the basic stuff in your chipped favorite mug. It's quiet. The light's soft. For a few seconds, everything feels enough. That's the spark. That's the pulse of gratitude. Gratitude, in Stoic philosophy, is not just a mood. It's a discipline. Seneca was big on this. He argued that the ability to enjoy what you already have, not what you might get, is what separates peace from misery. In his words, it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor. Modern psychology completely backs this. A 2003 study by Emmons and McCullough found that people who kept regular gratitude journals reported better physical health, higher optimism, and made better progress toward personal goals, including financial ones. That's right, writing down what you're thankful for actually makes you smarter with money. Less impulsive. More focused. Less prone to buy a weird blender at 2 a.m. You might find this surprising, gratitude literally changes your brain. Neuroscience studies using MRI scans have shown that gratitude activates the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making, emotional regulation, and long-term thinking. Which, coincidentally, are all the things you need to handle your finances with clarity. So, while greed pushes you into short-term, fear-driven choices, gratitude gently pulls you toward calm, intentional decisions. You don't spend to fill a void. You spend to support your values. The problem? Greed doesn't wear a villain's cape. It shows up in whispers, you've earned this, why not treat yourself? That's not that expensive. And it feels justified. Gratitude, on the other hand, rarely shouts. It's quiet. It shows up when you pause, when you reflect, when you choose to see your life with honest eyes instead of hungry ones. Philosophers have long debated the relationship between gratitude and virtue. Is it a natural byproduct of character, or is it a practice that builds it? The Stoics believed it was both. Gratitude wasn't just a sign you were on the right track, it put you on the right track. Here's something interesting. Marcus Aurelius, ruler of the Roman Empire, began his meditations not with grand philosophical insights, but with simple acknowledgments of people he was grateful for. Teachers, family, even slaves who had served him kindly. Imagine being emperor of everything, and still taking time to say thank you. Now contrast that with our modern money culture. It's fast, it's loud, and it's built on the idea that you're always one purchase away from finally feeling right. A better phone. A newer car. A bigger house. That next thing. But here's the kicker, once you get it, the feeling vanishes. Psychologists call this the hedonic treadmill, the tendency to quickly return to a baseline level of satisfaction no matter what you acquire. You buy the thing, feel the high, and then want the next thing. The chase never ends. Unless you hit the brakes with gratitude. Just a quirky detail, Seneca once gave away massive portions of his wealth and still lived in comfort. When asked why, he said it helped him appreciate what he kept even more. He called it practicing sufficiency. Not self-denial. Just satisfaction. And that's a concept worth exploring, sufficiency. It's not the same as scarcity. It's the idea that what you have, right now, is enough. Not forever. Not always. But for today. Practicing gratitude rewires your sense of sufficiency. Instead of chasing more, you start cherishing what's here. And financially, this shifts everything. You spend less because you're not shopping out of lack. You save more because you value what you've built. You invest better because you're thinking long-term, not panic-clicking through TikTok finance hacks at 1 a.m. There remains considerable disagreement among economists about how gratitude impacts actual spending habits. But in psychology, the verdict's clearer: grateful people make more aligned, consistent financial decisions. Not perfect ones, just calmer ones. So how do you do this in real life? Start simple. Each night, list 3 things you're grateful for. Yes, even if it's just socks without holes, coffee that didn't spill, or a day when no surprise bill landed in your inbox. Then, stretch it. Be grateful for your current income, even if it's lower than you'd like. Grateful for your rent, even if it's higher than ideal. Grateful for a car that runs, even if it's not the one your coworkers drive. You're not tricking yourself. You're training yourself. Training your eyes to see abundance in ordinary things. Imagine standing in your kitchen. The lights are dim. The dishes are done. Your bank account isn't huge, but your anxiety's low. You feel content. Not because you bought anything, but because you finally noticed what was already yours. That's Stoic wealth. And as gratitude deepens, something unexpected happens. You start imagining what it would be like to lose it all. Not to spiral, but to strengthen. Because the Stoics weren't about avoiding hard thoughts, they were about meeting them head-on. Now we arrive at a practice that sounds, frankly, a little unsettling at first: negative visualization. Imagine losing everything. Your job. Your savings. Your favorite coffee mug. Even your dog, if you want to go full-on philosophical masochist. The Stoics did this kind of thing regularly, and no, they weren't trying to ruin a perfectly good afternoon. They believed that by imagining loss, they could reduce its sting. By facing the worst in their minds, they could walk more lightly through life, more grateful, more grounded. In a strange twist, thinking about losing something helps you appreciate it more, and fear it less. This idea, called premeditatio malorum, premeditation of evils, was a daily Stoic exercise. Marcus Aurelius did it. Seneca swore by it. Epictetus, well, he practically invented the mental doomsday drill. You might think, okay, but won't that make me more anxious? And here's where psychology steps in with a surprising twist. In a 2017 study published in the journal Emotion, researchers found that people who regularly engaged in structured negative visualization exercises actually experienced lower anxiety and higher resilience than those who avoided such thoughts. It turns out, by confronting your fears deliberately and on your own terms, you drain them of their power. This practice works particularly well with financial anxiety. Instead of catastrophizing every little money issue when it surprises you, you build a tolerance by imagining it before it happens. Not as a panic. As preparation. Just a quirky detail, Seneca would periodically go without meals, wear rough clothing, and sleep on the ground, not because he had to, but so that if he ever had to, it wouldn't break him. He'd finish those exercises by calmly asking himself, "Is this what I feared?" Now imagine that. You picture your worst financial fear, maybe it's losing your job, having to move, downsizing dramatically. Then you walk yourself through it, detail by detail. You ask, what would I actually do? Who could I lean on? What strengths do I still have? Suddenly, the monster under the bed starts to look a lot like a pile of laundry. Scary in the dark. Manageable in the light. Philosophers have long debated whether visualizing suffering desensitizes us or actually prepares us better. Some say it's emotional rehearsal. Others call it needless stress. But the Stoics, and an increasing number of psychologists, land firmly on the side of useful discomfort. Because financial freedom isn't just about avoiding hardship, it's about not being ruled by the fear of it. Now let's be clear. This isn't about manifesting disaster. You're not inviting bad luck. You're practicing resilience. You're developing what behavioral psychologists call a stress inoculation response. Your brain becomes less reactive to negative outcomes because it's seen them before, in controlled, imagined doses. Here's something interesting: some financial planners now incorporate negative visualization into their coaching. Instead of just calculating risk tolerance on a graph, they ask clients to emotionally imagine a financial loss, and then plan from that place. The result? More stable portfolios, fewer panic sells, and, ironically, more optimism. Because when you stop fearing the worst, you stop reacting like it's just around the corner. Try this: one quiet evening, write down 3 financial things you fear losing. Then one by one, imagine it happens. Walk yourself through it. Not the drama, just the facts. How would you respond? What options would you still have? What would remain unchanged? It might feel heavy at first. But then, strangely light. You realize that while discomfort is real, so is your adaptability. Your ability to cope. Your strength. And suddenly, that luxury upgrade you were considering feels less necessary. That tiny nest egg you were dismissing looks more precious. Your old shoes start to look like trophies of resilience rather than reminders of what you don't have. This practice builds what the Stoics called equanimity, a calm mind in all circumstances. And when you have that, you spend less reactively. You don't buy out of panic or peer pressure. You don't spiral into despair over one unexpected bill. You become less fragile, less flinchy. There remains considerable disagreement about how often to practice negative visualization. Some say daily. Others say only when fear starts creeping in. But everyone agrees, when used thoughtfully, it sharpens your perspective. You start to see clearly what you do have. And how much of it is actually enough. Imagine you're looking at your life from the outside. Not the fantasy version, the real one. The clutter, the cracked phone screen, the good enough job, the small wins. Could you be okay, even if some of it vanished? If the answer is yes, even a hesitant, whispery yes, then congratulations. You've just practiced a bit of Stoic wealth. Because wealth, to the Stoics, wasn't about accumulation. It was about calm. Not needing more. Not fearing less. And as you practice that mental calm, you'll start to notice something else: your relationship with time is shifting. You're not just chasing money anymore. You're becoming curious about how you spend your life. And that leads us gently into something far more precious than gold: your time. Let's shift the lens now, from your wallet to your watch. Because time, my friend, is the one currency you never get back. And if you're not careful, you'll end up spending it like loose change, on things, people, and habits that don't add value but quietly steal it. The Stoics knew this too well. In fact, they were obsessed with time. Not just how they spend it, but how rarely we realize what it's truly worth. Seneca opens his essay on the shortness of life with a slap-in-the-face truth: it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. Ouch. And he wrote that before TikTok. So here's the question, what's more valuable, your money or your minutes? Modern psychology gives us a clear answer. In a landmark 2016 study published in Social Psychological and Personality Science, researchers found that people who prioritized time over money consistently reported higher levels of life satisfaction. Not sometimes. Not maybe. Consistently. You might find this surprising. When given a hypothetical choice between a lower-paying job with more free time and a higher-paying job with less, people who chose the time-rich path experienced greater overall happiness even when controlling for income. Translation: more money doesn't make up for less life. But here's the tricky part, society constantly tells you the opposite. You're praised for hustle. For overtime. For being booked and busy. You measure success by how productive, efficient, and monetizable you are. You're encouraged to turn every hobby into a side hustle. You rest only when exhausted. You spend money to save time, only to use that time making more money. It's an exhausting loop. The Stoics saw this madness coming. They believed that a wise person protects their time more fiercely than their gold. Because wealth can be rebuilt. Time? Not so much. Here's something interesting. Marcus Aurelius, amid governing a literal empire, still found time to write reflective journals to himself, scribbled between war councils and political chaos. He treated time like sacred ground. Not just chunks of hours, but life itself. Philosophers have long debated whether time has intrinsic value, or whether it gains meaning only through how we use it. Stoics land firmly on the side of intentional use. It's not about packing every minute. It's about living deliberately. Knowing what matters, and letting go of what doesn't. So what does that mean for your financial life? Well, ask yourself this, are you spending money to buy time, or to distract yourself from how you're spending it? Because that's the core distinction. You might spend extra on delivery to avoid cooking, which could free up time to be with your kids, or to scroll aimlessly. You might work overtime for a bigger paycheck, but never get around to using that money for anything meaningful. Financial freedom isn't just about how much you have, it's about how much of your life you own. Just a quirky detail, Epictetus taught that slavery of the mind is worse than slavery of the body. And he meant it literally, he was born a slave. But even under bondage, he believed his time, his thoughts, his attention, were his own. If he could claim ownership of those things in a Roman household, you can reclaim your Sunday afternoons. Let's bring it down to the everyday. How many times have you said, I don't have time, when what you really meant was I don't choose to make time? The Stoics would challenge you here. Not with guilt, but with clarity. They'd ask, what are you actually buying with your money? Time? Or noise? Take a quiet inventory. Are you paying for convenience that gives you peace, or just more screen time? Are you overworking for a dream that doesn't belong to you? Are you deferring joy for someday while today slips by in a fog? There remains considerable disagreement in the productivity world about whether time should be managed, optimized, or simply protected. Stoicism leans toward protection. It says, be ruthless with your hours. Not to squeeze more out of them, but to live more inside them. So how do you start? Begin with a simple shift. Ask, is this worth my life, instead of, can I afford this? Because every purchase, every commitment, every yes, you're trading minutes for it. Tiny, invisible withdrawals from your one finite balance. Imagine standing in a store, debating a fancy gadget. Pause and think, this costs $300. That's roughly 10 hours of work. Is it worth 10 hours of your life? Sometimes the answer is yes. Absolutely yes. Joy matters. But now, you're choosing from clarity, not compulsion. And it goes both ways. When you rest, rest. When you laugh, laugh fully. When you spend time with someone you love, don't multitask them. That's the secret Stoic luxury, full presence. It's free. It's rare. And it's where true wealth lives. Here's a quick experiment. Tomorrow, try tracking how you feel during the time you usually spend numbing out, scrolling, stressing, online cart filling. Just observe. Then track how you feel after 10 uninterrupted minutes watching the sky, reading something beautiful, or calling someone who gets you. No cost. Just time. And notice what feels more valuable. That shift, valuing time over money, isn't just a financial strategy. It's a life philosophy. And it leads you to something else the Stoics cherished: simplicity. Not as aesthetic. Not as an Instagram trend. But as a way of seeing. Of moving through life with less clutter, more clarity, and deeper meaning. And that's exactly where we'll go next. Simplicity. The kind that doesn't come with branded hashtags or minimalist coffee tables that cost more than your monthly groceries. We're talking about the kind the Stoics practiced, the kind that starts in the mind, settles into your habits, and shows up quietly in how you move through the world. It's not about owning nothing. It's about being owned by less. You wake up. Your space is calm. No piles of unopened Amazon boxes. No impulse purchases staring at you with judgment in their discount tags. Just things you need, things you love, and room to breathe. That's Stoic simplicity. That's what we're heading toward. The Stoics believed that a cluttered life breeds a cluttered mind. And a cluttered mind? Not exactly a great decision maker, especially when it comes to finances. Seneca warned that chasing too many things scatters your energy and weakens your sense of self. He called it a form of internal exile, being everywhere, wanting everything, belonging nowhere. Modern psychology echoes this in what's known as decision fatigue, the cognitive drain that happens when you're faced with too many choices. A 2011 study from Columbia University showed that people make worse decisions when overwhelmed by options. That includes financial ones. Think about the last time you tried to pick a health insurance plan. Or, let's be real, even just a toothpaste brand. You might find this surprising. Simplicity actually boosts your brain's ability to focus. When you remove non-essential decisions, like what to wear, what to eat, what to buy, you free up mental space for higher-order thinking. The kind you need to budget wisely, resist impulse spending, or choose a job that aligns with your values instead of just your bills. Just a quirky detail, Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, reportedly lived so simply that his students joked he owned fewer possessions than a bird had feathers. He saw simplicity as a kind of freedom, freedom from the need to impress, the need to upgrade, the need to keep up. Philosophers have long debated whether simplicity is a moral virtue or just a lifestyle preference. But for the Stoics, it was both. A simple life wasn't just easier, it was better. Clearer. More honest. So how do you bring this into your own financial life? Start by asking one deceptively hard question: what is enough? Enough house? Enough income? Enough clothes? Enough apps? The answer will be different for everyone. But the Stoic point is, there is an answer. And once you find it, you can stop chasing everything else. This doesn't mean selling all your stuff and living in a tiny home with a goat named Marcus. Though, honestly, if that sounds peaceful, no judgment. It means curating your life like you'd curate a beautiful playlist. Keep what plays well. Cut what creates noise. There remains considerable disagreement in the minimalist movement about how far to go. Some advocate for radical reductionism. Others, for thoughtful moderation. The Stoics? Squarely in the middle. Keep what serves your soul. Let go of what burdens it. And here's where the financial impact kicks in. Simplicity reduces expenses, not by force, but by clarity. When you're not constantly seeking new experiences, new things, new validations, you naturally spend less. Your money stops leaking into convenience buys, dopamine hits, and attempts to fill an emotional void. You become deliberate. Imagine your finances like a room. What's crowding it? Subscriptions you forgot to cancel? Purchases you don't use? Debt that comes from trying to match someone else's lifestyle? Now imagine cleaning it out, not to have less, but to make space. For what matters. For what lasts. Here's something interesting. In a 2014 study, researchers found that people who aligned their spending with their core values, simplicity among them, reported significantly higher well-being than those who spent based on social comparison or emotional impulse. Your budget isn't just numbers. It's a mirror. And simplicity gives you a clearer reflection. Try this practice. Take 5 minutes and scan your space. Ask, does this object make my life better, or just busier? Then look at your bank statement. Same question. You'll start to notice a pattern, how much you've been spending to support an identity you're not even sure you want. That realization? It's powerful. Because once you know what enough looks like for you, your entire financial framework begins to shift. You don't need the biggest. You don't need the flashiest. You need what fits. What works. What brings peace. And with that peace comes a new kind of power, the ability to say no. To trends. To upgrades. To the subtle voice that says you need just one more thing before you can finally relax. You already have what you need. The real work is noticing it. So tonight, let this be your quiet reminder, more is not always more. Sometimes, less is not only enough, it's better. And as that realization settles in, something else gets easier. The daily decision-making. The overwhelm. The mental noise around money. And that, my friend, leads us gently into the next chapter, the quiet brilliance of cutting through chaos with simplicity in action. Simplicity in philosophy is one thing. But simplicity in practice, especially with your finances, that's where the real magic lies. Because it's one thing to say, I value minimalism, and another thing entirely to open your budgeting app and not want to throw your phone out the window. Here's where we meet decision fatigue, that silent energy thief you didn't even realize was messing with your money. Decision fatigue is what happens when your brain, tired from too many tiny choices, starts making worse ones. You're more likely to say yes to things you should probably say no to. Like just one more online purchase. Or that weird subscription that seemed like a good idea at midnight. Or upgrading your phone because the camera might be slightly better than the one you already have. A 2011 study by psychologist Roy Baumeister showed that decision fatigue doesn't just affect what you buy, it affects how you feel, how you relate to others, and how much willpower you have left by the end of the day. Spoiler, not much. Now, imagine living in a way that respects your brain's bandwidth. Where your financial systems are simple. Where you don't need to decide every day whether to cook, spend, or panic. Where you've already decided once, and now you just follow your own wisdom. That, right there, is a Stoic dream. Marcus Aurelius would have loathed budgeting apps, not because he was anti-technology, okay, fine, he kind of was, but because many of us use them to chase control instead of create calm. He'd ask, are you using your tools, or are your tools using you? You might find this surprising, the average adult makes over 35,000 decisions a day. Not all of them are conscious. But they all cost mental energy. And when it runs low, guess what usually suffers first? Yep, your money choices. Just a quirky detail, Stoics like Cleanthes were known for repeating the same meals, wearing the same clothes, and keeping the same daily routines, not out of poverty, but out of intention. They were reserving their mental power for things that mattered, virtue, wisdom, peace. Not menu options or outfit planning. In modern language, they were hacking their cognitive load before it was cool. Philosophers have long debated whether simplicity leads to wisdom or whether wisdom naturally craves simplicity. But the Stoics? They skipped the argument and just practiced both. So what does that look like in your life? Let's start small. 1. Automate the boring stuff. Bills, savings, donations, set them on autopilot. Not to forget them, but to protect your energy. When your money moves with quiet consistency, you don't have to spend every morning playing financial Jenga. You get your brain back. 2. Create decision templates. Instead of asking, "Should I buy this?" 100 times a week, use a script. Something like, "If it's over $50 and not in the budget, I'll wait 3 days." Or, "If I wouldn't buy it twice, I don't buy it once." These tiny rules aren't restrictive, they're liberating. You pre-decide so your future self doesn't have to. 3. Use constraints as clarity. Give yourself a fixed grocery list, a rotating wardrobe, a capped spending limit on non-essentials. Not forever. Just long enough to notice the calm that comes when you don't have to redecide every single thing. Choice feels like freedom until you have too many. Here's something interesting. People who voluntarily adopt constraints, yes, even with money, report higher satisfaction, not lower. Why? Because they're not living in a constant state of low-grade financial tension. They know what's happening. They know what to expect. And that reduces stress. There remains considerable disagreement in behavioral economics about how much freedom is optimal. Some argue for total flexibility. Others, for rigid structure. The Stoics once again go for the middle path, enough structure to stay steady, enough space to stay human. Imagine your financial life like a garden. If everything is wide open, things grow wildly and chaotically. If everything is overpruned, nothing thrives. But with a few clear boundaries, your values bloom. So tonight, consider this. What decisions are costing you more than they're worth? What can you decide once so you don't have to keep deciding again? And how can you make simplicity a form of self-respect? Because that's what this is, in the end. Respecting your time, your energy, your peace. Choosing to be clear, not clever. Choosing systems over stress. Choosing a quiet path in a noisy world. And with every simplified choice, you gain something else, strength. Not the performative, hustle harder kind, but the inner steadiness that says, "I don't need more noise. I've got this." Which leads us into one of the deepest Stoic truths of all: real freedom, financial and otherwise, doesn't come from more money. It comes from self-discipline. Self-discipline. The word alone can make your shoulders tense a little. It brings to mind boot camps, alarm clocks, and people saying no to cookies with suspicious ease. But in the Stoic sense, self-discipline isn't about punishing yourself, it's about freeing yourself. From impulse. From chaos. From the fear of what happens when life veers off script. You've probably heard the phrase financial freedom. But here's the twist: the Stoics would say that freedom is not the absence of restrictions, it's the presence of self-mastery. Seneca called it liberty through self-restraint. A paradox, maybe, but one that makes sense the moment you look at your own habits. Because let's be honest, how many of your financial regrets come from saying yes when you meant to pause? Or clicking order now when you really meant to sleep on it? You might find this surprising. In a long-term study on self-control published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, researchers followed a group of individuals for more than 30 years. They found that children who showed greater self-discipline at an early age went on to have better financial health, fewer debts, higher credit scores, and even better physical well-being. That's right, discipline now predicts stability later. The Stoics didn't have these charts and metrics, but they knew the terrain. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And he didn't just mean in times of stress, he meant in daily, seemingly small moments. Like whether you splurge on that new gadget or put the money in your emergency fund. Like whether you react to fear or respond with reason. Just a quirky detail: Marcus Aurelius, emperor of the Roman Empire, trained himself to wake up early not because he enjoyed it, he actually wrote about hating it, but because he believed he owed it to himself to be in control of his own instincts. His diary entry goes something like, "You're not a farm animal. Get up." Charming, right? Philosophers have long debated whether discipline is a trait you're born with or a skill you build. The Stoics leaned toward the latter, and practiced daily exercises to strengthen it. They saw discipline like a muscle. Use it, and it grows. Ignore it, and it softens. So how does this apply to your financial life? Let's begin here. Your greatest financial power isn't your salary, your credit score, or even your savings account. It's your ability to pause. The pause between the craving and the purchase. The pause between the panic and the reaction. The pause between I want and do I need? That pause is where your freedom lives. Here's something interesting. Neuroscientists have discovered that when you delay gratification, literally wait to get something your brain wants, the prefrontal cortex becomes more active. That's the part of the brain responsible for planning, logic, and long-term thinking. Every time you choose to wait, you're strengthening the very part of your mind that helps you sustain financial peace. But this isn't about turning into a monk who never spends money. The Stoics weren't against pleasure. They were just wary of being ruled by it. That's a big difference. Self-discipline doesn't mean deprivation. It means choice. The power to decide with clarity. To know what matters most, and protect it. Take a moment and think, what would happen if, for 1 week, you gave yourself a spending filter? Maybe, only spend on needs and scheduled plans. Or, no purchases without a 24-hour pause. Just as an experiment. Not forever. Just long enough to hear your own mind more clearly. There remains considerable disagreement in the self-help world about whether discipline is the secret to happiness or the enemy of spontaneity. The Stoics would say, it depends on your goal. If your goal is peace, freedom, and a stable foundation, then discipline is the door. Not the lock. You don't have to become a robot. Just someone who lives on purpose. And when you do that, when you practice self-mastery in daily, quiet ways, something profound happens, your confidence builds. Not the loud kind. The steady, I can handle what comes kind. You stop being afraid of your own impulses. You stop needing to buy your way out of boredom. You stop confusing more with better. And maybe most importantly, you stop outsourcing your peace to things you can't control. So tonight, let's redefine freedom. Not as some future destination where everything's perfect, but as a skill you can practice right now. In your choices. In your mindset. In your spending. Because every time you resist what's easy in favor of what's aligned, you're telling yourself, I trust you. And that trust becomes your compass, especially when life throws a curveball. Which brings us to a reality we all face at some point: financial setbacks, failures, and fears. How the Stoics handled them? Well, that's a masterclass in fortitude. Failure. Just the word alone can make your stomach tighten a little. Maybe you think of a missed mortgage payment, a maxed out credit card, or that time you poured your savings into a sure thing that turned out to be not so sure. Whatever shape it takes, financial failure isn't just about money, it's about identity. And fear. And what it feels like to fall short of what you thought you'd become. The Stoics weren't afraid to talk about failure. In fact, they trained for it. Not just to survive it, but to grow from it. Because they knew something most of us forget: failure doesn't define you, your response to it does. You might find this surprising. Marcus Aurelius, despite being emperor, kept private writings where he chastised himself for getting upset about small things, for not living up to his principles, for falling short. He failed daily, and then forgave himself. Quietly. Without drama. And then he got back to work. In modern psychology, this maps closely to what's called resilience theory, the study of how some people bounce back from hardship while others get stuck. Turns out, it's not the size of the failure that matters, it's your story about it. If you see failure as a verdict, it becomes a wall. But if you see it as feedback, it becomes a step. Seneca once said, difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. And nowhere is that more relevant than with money. Because finances? They're never a straight line. You will fall. You will miscalculate. You will, at some point, buy something that seems smart and now just takes up closet space and shame. And yet, you're still here. There's something oddly comforting in knowing that failure is universal. Everyone has their oops purchase. Their financial blind spot. Their season of scarcity. The Stoics would tell you that none of it is wasted, unless you refuse to learn from it. Here's something interesting. A 2020 study on financial behavior after bankruptcy found that individuals who reframed their failure as a lesson, rather than a loss, were significantly more likely to regain financial stability within 5 years. It wasn't just about income. It was about mindset. Philosophers have long debated whether suffering is necessary for growth. The Stoics didn't romanticize pain, but they didn't waste it either. They believed in turning every wound into wisdom, every loss into perspective. Just a quirky detail, Epictetus, who lived in poverty for most of his life, once taught his students by deliberately breaking a valuable clay cup in front of them. Why? To prove that nothing is permanent, and that our attachment to things is the real source of our suffering, not the loss itself. So how do you apply the Stoic approach the next time your finances go sideways? Start with the mantra, "This is not who I am. This is what I'm learning." Then take a quiet inventory. What actually happened? What triggered it? What part was in your control? What part wasn't? No shame. No spiral. Just clarity. The Stoics had a tool for this. They called it reviewing the day. At night, they'd ask themselves, what did I do well? What did I fail at? What will I try tomorrow? It wasn't about perfection. It was about pattern recognition. Because when you track your failures gently, without judgment, you start to see their shape. You start to learn your triggers, your blind spots, your tendencies to buy when you're tired, or lie to yourself about what counts as essential. You also start to see your strength. There remains considerable disagreement in philosophical circles about whether the Stoic response to failure is too cold. Critics argue it lacks emotional processing. But many psychologists counter that Stoicism offers containment, a way to feel without falling apart. Imagine this: you overdraft your account. The old you spirals. Feels shame. Avoids checking the balance for days. The Stoic you? You pause. Breathe. Say, okay. That happened. Why? You investigate, not to punish, but to prevent. You reset your systems. You forgive yourself. You move forward. That's not denial. That's maturity. And there's something else here, too. Fear of failure is often worse than failure itself. The dread. The anticipation. The pressure to be perfect. The Stoics believed that by facing failure head-on, even imagining it in advance, you rob it of its bite. Remember premeditatio malorum? The mental dress rehearsal for loss? When you apply it to financial failure, it starts to sound like this: if I make the wrong investment, will I still be okay? If I have to take a lower-paying job for now, will I lose my worth? If I go through a lean season, what will I still have? It's not pessimism. It's armor. You're building a worldview where failure is a comma, not a period. Where a mistake with money doesn't mean you're bad at life. Where falling short is just another part of walking forward. And over time, this practice builds a kind of emotional wealth that no amount of income can replace. Because when you're not afraid to fail, you're freer to try, to build, to risk, to grow. So tonight, whatever your financial past looks like, let it soften. Let it teach. Let it be fuel, not shame. Because on the other side of failure isn't just recovery, it's fortitude. And that kind of strength doesn't just change how you spend. It changes how you show up. For yourself. For your people. For the legacy you'll leave behind. And that, softly and significantly, leads us into something the Stoics held sacred: not wealth, not glory, but legacy. Legacy. A word that usually conjures grand images, statues, inheritance, maybe a scholarship fund with your name on it. But for the Stoics, legacy wasn't about monuments. It was about impact. Not what you leave behind, but what you leave within the people who knew you. And maybe even the people who didn't. It might sound strange to talk about death in the same breath as financial freedom, but the Stoics would insist on it. They believed that contemplating mortality wasn't morbid, it was clarifying. It stripped away the noise, the status games, the debt-fueled desire to leave your mark. It brought you back to one haunting, beautiful question: what actually matters? Seneca once wrote, "While we wait for life, life passes." He meant that we get so busy chasing the next thing, money, security, applause, that we forget the simple truth: our time here is limited. Not in a scary way. In a motivating way. You might find this surprising. In a recent study published in Psychological Science, participants who were asked to reflect on their own death made more generous, long-term financial decisions than those who weren't. They prioritized meaning over momentary pleasure. Legacy over luxury. That's the paradox. When you face death, your decisions get sharper. You begin to see what really deserves your energy, and your money. The Stoics practiced this daily. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself regularly, "You could leave life right now." Let that determine what you do, say, and think. In other words, live like someone who means it. And here's where this ties beautifully into finances. So many of us get stuck in a cycle of saving without knowing why. Or spending without considering the ripples. We work to leave something behind, but rarely ask, what kind of presents am I leaving behind today? Just a quirky detail, Musonius Rufus, a lesser-known but deeply respected Stoic teacher, believed that the most valuable legacy was ethical behavior, not wealth. He taught that a person's character, not their coin, was the true inheritance. He even instructed his students to focus less on writing books and more on living wisely, saying, "What you are is louder than what you leave." There remains considerable disagreement in philosophical circles about whether death awareness enhances life or simply burdens it. But psychologists increasingly support the Stoic view: memento mori, remember that you will die, can actually make you more present, more grateful, and more intentional. So what does this mean for you, right now? It means asking some legacy-level questions about your money. Are you building wealth or just hoarding fear? Are you saving toward freedom, or just postponing joy? Are you spending in ways that reflect your values, or your insecurities? Imagine someone you love, maybe a child, a friend, a partner, reading your financial story like a memoir. What would it say? That you were anxious? Generous? Scarcity-driven? Value-driven? That you chased trends or built foundations? That's legacy. Not a trust fund. A trail. Here's something interesting. In estate planning, many financial advisors now incorporate legacy letters, written reflections that accompany wills or trusts. They're not about assets. They're about meaning. Here's why I made the decisions I did. Here's what I hope you learn from my life. Here's what matters to me. Stoicism, in letter form. You don't have to be wealthy to leave a powerful legacy. You just have to be clear. Clear about your priorities. Clear about how you want to be remembered. Clear about what kind of financial path you're creating, for others to walk on, or walk away from. Try this: write a simple, one-page legacy statement. Not about your job or your net worth, but about your money habits, your values, your hopes for the next generation. Read it back to yourself. Is it the story you want to be telling? If not, no shame, just adjust the plotline. You're still writing. Philosophers often talk about the idea of the good life. The Stoics believed that a good life was a virtuous life. That what made your time meaningful wasn't what you accumulated, but how wisely you used your resources, especially when you had the chance to help someone else. Because here's the final twist in this Stoic approach to legacy: it's not about how long you're remembered. It's about how fully you lived while you had the chance. That full-hearted way of living naturally shapes your spending. You support causes, not just companies. You invest in time with people you love, not just things you can show off. You give, when you can, not because you're loaded, but because you're grounded. And when you leave behind something rare: an example. A ripple. A voice in someone's head saying, "Hey, I saw someone do this differently." That's a kind of wealth no one can steal, and no market can crash. So tonight, let this idea settle softly into your heart: your money is not your legacy. You are. And as that thought lingers, as your body settles deeper into stillness, one last piece falls into place. Because when you let go of control, desire, comparison, clutter, fear, and even the weight of your own name, you return to what the Stoics held above all else. Peace. Peace. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of struggle. Not a beach vacation. Not a bigger emergency fund. Not a clutter-free living room. We're talking about the kind of peace the Stoics spent their whole lives trying to master, the kind you can carry with you through job loss, market dips, relationship tension, and even a broken toaster on a Monday morning. And here's what might surprise you most: peace isn't the goal of financial freedom. It's the path. Modern life would have you believe the opposite. It says, work harder, earn more, build the dream, and then you can rest. But that's not rest, it's deferral. And the Stoics weren't interested in deferring the good life. They wanted it now. Not through indulgence, but through clarity. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are disturbed by external events, it is not the events themselves that trouble you, but only your perception of them, and this you can revoke at any moment." That's peace. Not from the world, but within it. So what does peace look like in the context of your finances? It looks like this: you log into your bank account without flinching. You open a bill without your chest tightening. You spend mindfully, not nervously. You save because it feels good, not because you're terrified. Peace is knowing that your self-worth doesn't rise and fall with your net worth. That your ability to experience joy doesn't require a bigger paycheck. That you're allowed to feel whole, even while things are incomplete. You might find this surprising. In a study on financial well-being conducted by the CFPB, researchers found that people's sense of financial peace was more closely linked to control and competence than to income level. Translation: you don't need more money to feel better, you need better relationships with the money you have. And that's the Stoic sweet spot. Just a quirky detail: Stoic philosopher Hierocles described life as a series of concentric circles: self, family, community, humanity. He encouraged people to draw peace from alignment. To act wisely in every circle. To reduce the distance between their inner lives and their outer actions. Imagine that, a budget that lines up with your deepest values, not just your receipts. There remains considerable disagreement in philosophy about whether peace is a virtue or a byproduct. But for the Stoics, it was both. Peace wasn't just something you stumbled into, it was something you trained for. Like strength. Like discipline. Like courage. And this is where your financial freedom becomes more than a spreadsheet. It becomes a lifestyle. A mindset. A kind of quiet, personal rebellion against noise, pressure, and scarcity. Because when you approach your finances with Stoic peace, your decisions get simpler. You buy what matters. You let go of what doesn't. You trust yourself in the uncertainty. Here's something interesting: financial therapists, yes, that's a thing, often say that the key to financial health isn't knowing more, but feeling safer. And Stoicism, at its heart, is a safety net for your soul. It says, even when the numbers don't add up, you still matter. Even when the future is unclear, your character is clear. Even when you lose what you have, you don't lose who you are. So how do you practice peace? Start with slowing down. Peace doesn't rush. When you feel the urge to spend, pause. When you feel panic about money, breathe. When you feel jealousy about someone else's success, return to your own lane. And when you feel like you're behind, remember, you're not racing them. You're walking your own path. At your own pace. Let go of the fantasy that peace is on the other side of achievement. It's not a reward. It's a way of being. A daily decision to remain calm inside, even when the outside world clatters. Because, if you've made it this far, you already know, you can't control everything. You will never have enough to make uncertainty disappear. But you can be enough to meet it. That's what Stoicism was trying to teach all along. And so now, in these final moments together, let's bring it all home. Let's tie the threads of control, desire, discomfort, gratitude, resilience, and discipline into one soft, steady truth. You are already closer to financial freedom than you think. Not because of how much you earn, but because of how little you need to feel whole. And with that, we begin our gentle wind down. Let's soften now. Loosen your thoughts. Let the ideas float gently behind you like dandelion seeds drifting on a warm evening breeze. You've journeyed through ancient philosophy and modern science, through dopamine triggers and digital temptations, through the quiet rituals of simplicity, discipline, and resilience. And now you're here. Right where you started. But maybe a little lighter. A little clearer. Maybe you don't need to fix everything tonight. Maybe you don't need to figure it all out. Just breathe. You are not your bank account. You are not your shopping history. You are not your student loans, your missed payments, your messy budgeting app. You are more than the numbers. You are the calm in the storm. The pause between the noise. The stillness between transactions. Let go, gently, of the urge to calculate. To optimize. To achieve. You've done enough for today. Let yourself rest in the knowledge that peace is already inside you. It's not something you earn. It's something you allow. Feel the simplicity of that truth settle in your chest like a soft weight. No pressure. No shame. Just ease. You've seen how the Stoics walked, quietly, humbly, wisely, through fire and fortune, without clinging to either. You can walk like that too. You already are. And as you drift now into sleep, let this final thought carry you. You do not need more to be okay. You only need to remember what matters. And that is more than enough. Sweet dreams.